crazy for me, we're gonna bring Carly out. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, go wild and crazy.
So conferences are a thing that you have to deal with in academia. Yeah. From my perspective, for career researchers, they seem to mostly consist of opportunities for reunions with their colleagues in sometimes interesting locations. For fellow PhD students such as myself, there are opportunities for additional terror, anxiety, and novel ways of avoiding writing up. So we're meant to be networking at these things, right? Presenting ourselves as eager and competent young career researchers. But mostly what I see in the eyes of fellow PhD students, and I assume this is the same in my eyes, is that of a deer caught in the headlights. An established historian is walking my direction. What do I do? Freeze, eyes huge. I don't know whether to try to engage and stumble over my words or flee. I know there's a colony of other terrified PhD students in the corner, and I can go find and join them. Safety in numbers and all that. But sometimes I'm able to overcome that freeze or flee reflex and actually meet new people. And sometimes they're not even fellow terrified PhD students. Amazing. But let me roll it back a bit and introduce myself. I'm Carly, and as you can tell from my accent, I am an expert in early medieval Scottish history. And medieval history, you say, but this is the Glasgow Science Festival. Fear not, or actually fear quite a bit, because I also have a Master's of Science in medieval history. Be terrified. So I'm in my 3rd year now of my PhD, and I'm trying to get as many things on the old CV as possible to maybe, possibly, hopefully, oh, please God, let me get a job when this is done. And that includes things like conferences. And I was very fortunate. I was invited to speak at a conference in Vancouver, Canada in April, and that was amazing. I'd never been invited to a conference before. I'd applied and been able to go, but this was a new thing. I felt like I'd leveled up in academia, like a real academic. And let me tell you, I was terrified. I'm going all the way over there, and I've been invited by a colleague who lives and works in Australia, and so this networking thing, I was like, right, yeah, international, worldwide networking, I've got this started. So I get to Canada, and I meet academics from the US, from Canada, from even Beirut. But, the most interesting and most amusing introduction that I made that week was someone who lives and works in Stirling. That's right, I flew 14 hours by plane halfway across the world to meet someone who lives an hour away from me. That's like 4 stops on the train. Well done, self. And I've been fortunate to have another paper accepted for a conference just coming up. In fact, they've just released the conference schedule, and so as any academic would do, I am, quickly trying to look through to see who's going to be there to catch me like a deer in the headlights, and also to see what kind of amusing titles people have come up with for their papers. And you might be surprised to hear how much effort goes into coming up with what one hopes is going to be a witty title, especially considering how few witty titles for papers there are at conferences. So as an example, I thought I was fairly clever in naming my paper, which is about 2 monasteries, one in the west of Scotland and one in the south of Ireland, A Tale of 2 Monasteries. Yeah, I worked real hard on that one. But, I actually didn't submit the paper with that title on it. So when the conference schedule's released and I'm going through it, lo and behold, someone else has named their paper A Tale of 2 Churches. That's 10 points from Ravenclaw. So now here's me having to try to come up with, yet another witty title for my paper that is still gonna, somewhat describe what I'm talking about. Yeah. So after all of this, I have to go through immigration, right? And they ask you questions in immigration like, what are you doing in our country? And at this point, you want to give them an honest answer that is still going to convince them to let you through quickly. And I find this doesn't happen often as a medievalist because they want to know what the title of the conference is. And then they want to know why a conference on the islands of the North Atlantic is taking place on the Pacific coast. Yeah, that's an explanation. And in addition to that, you have the form that you have to fill out, right? And they want to know, are you bringing large amounts of money into the country? Do you plan on breaking any laws while you're here? And one that I find interesting is, have you been in any agricultural fields or around any farm animals? But what they don't ask, which I recently found amusing, is whether or not you've been digging up graves with human remains. That seems like a great way to release ancient curses or raise an undead army. On an unrelated note, I've been volunteering at Govan Old Parish Church recently. So I'll get to go through immigration in Ireland and wish me luck. But after all of this, you still have to, get to the conference and actually present your paper. And that itself can be really anxiety-inducing. And I find that it helps to kind of work your way up to that. And so you start at home, alone, not in front of the mirror. Because at first, you can't even stomach the thought of you looking at you while you're giving your presentation. And then, maybe in front of the mirror. You slowly work your way up until you'll give your presentation to your roommates, usually over their strenuous objection. And I find at this point, it really helps to stand up in front of a room of people you don't know, who don't know anything about your work, and whose opinion on your life is worthless. So I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight.